Barry Windham might be the greatest wrestler you've never heard enough about. Standing 6 feet 6 inches with the technical skills of a cruiserweight and the power of a monster, Windham had it all. He was a tag team champion, a Horsemen member, and put on classic matches with Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes. Yet somehow, he managed to capture the NWA World Championship just once. And that fleeting moment of glory was so painfully short that it's been erased from wrestling memory itself. Today, we're breaking down his entire career from his early WWF days to his later struggles with motivation that left fans wondering what could have been. But Barry's story really starts with something most wrestlers never get: being born into wrestling royalty. Barry Clinton Windham was born on July 4, 1958. His father, Robert Jack Windham, had already made a name for himself as Blackjack Mulligan, one of the toughest and most respected big men in the business. While most kids were playing with action figures, Barry was watching his dad work matches and learning the ins and outs of professional wrestling from an early age. The Windham household wasn't your typical American family setup. Barry grew up surrounded by wrestlers who would stop by the house talking shop about matches, territories, and the business side of things. He heard stories about what worked in the ring and what didn't, long before he ever stepped foot in a wrestling school. This gave him a unique perspective that most wrestlers spend years trying to figure out on their own. Barry understood ring psychology and crowd reactions before he even knew what those terms meant. But here's the thing about being wrestling royalty. Everyone expects you to be just as good as your old man, if not better. Blackjack Mulligan stood 6 feet 9 inches and was known as one of the most legitimate tough guys in wrestling. Barry had some serious shoes to fill, and people weren't going to give him any breaks just because of his last name. In fact, it probably made things harder because fans and other wrestlers were always comparing him to his father's reputation. Barry didn't just inherit the wrestling gene, though. He also got his father's size, reaching 6 feet 6 inches by the time he was in high school. That height made him stand out on the football field at West Texas State University, where he played as a defensive end. Football gave Barry something that most wrestlers have to develop over years of training: legitimate athletic ability and an understanding of how to use his body effectively. He learned how to move despite his size, how to generate power from different positions, and how to read opponents' movements. The combination of his natural athletic gifts and his wrestling education created something special. Most big men in wrestling had to choose between being powerful or being technical. Barry didn't have to make that choice because he'd been around the business long enough to understand that the best wrestlers could do both. He watched his father work and saw how size could be an advantage without being a limitation. Training-wise, Barry had access to knowledge and connections that other aspiring wrestlers could only dream about. Blackjack Mulligan knew all the top wrestlers and promoters in the business. He understood what it took to succeed at the highest level and could pass that information directly to his son. Barry learned from watching established stars work and got feedback from people who had main evented in major territories. Most wrestlers have to figure out these lessons through trial and error over many years. The wrestling business in the late 1970s was all about territories, and having Blackjack Mulligan as your father meant Barry had an in with multiple promotions. Promoters knew the Windham name carried weight with fans, especially in areas where Blackjack had been a star. This opened doors for Barry that stayed closed for other young wrestlers trying to break into the business. He could get tryout matches and opportunities based on his family connection. But those connections also created pressure. Wrestling fans knew who Barry was before he ever had his first match. They expected him to wrestle like his father, to have the same intensity and toughness that made Blackjack Mulligan famous. Every time Barry stepped in the ring, people were measuring him against his father's reputation. One bad match or lazy performance would get him labeled as someone who couldn't live up to the family name. The foundation Barry built during these early years shaped everything about his approach to wrestling. He understood that being big wasn't enough. You had to be able to work. He learned that fans respected legitimate toughness but also wanted to see technical skill. Most importantly, he realized that having natural gifts and family connections would get you in the door, but staying there meant proving you belonged through your own hard work and performances. Now, Barry had to step into the ring and show everyone he was worthy of carrying on the Windham wrestling legacy. Picture this: two clean-cut athletes who looked like they stepped out of a college brochure were about to take wrestling by storm. Barry Windham teamed up with Mike Rotunda in Florida Championship Wrestling around 1983, and they called themselves the U.S. Express. These guys weren't your typical wrestling characters with wild outfits and crazy gimmicks. They looked like regular athletes who happened to be really good at wrestling. Both had legitimate sports backgrounds. Barry with his football experience, and Mike with his amateur wrestling credentials from Syracuse University. The thing is, wrestling in the early 1980s was getting wilder by the year. You had characters like the Ultimate Warrior painting their faces and acting completely insane. Managers were dressing up like movie villains. Wrestlers were coming to the ring with elaborate costumes and over-the-top personalities. So when fans saw Barry and Mike walking to the ring in simple trunks with no flashy entrance music, it was actually kind of refreshing. They looked like athletes first and entertainers second. But here's the question everyone had. Could two normal-looking guys actually get over with wrestling fans? The wrestling business was moving toward entertainment and spectacle. Promoters were starting to think that you needed a wild character or a crazy gimmick to connect with audiences. Barry and Mike were betting that good wrestling and genuine athleticism would be enough. They were essentially testing whether fans still cared about actual wrestling ability. The answer came pretty quickly in Florida. The U.S. Express captured the Florida Tag Team Championship not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. They beat established teams like the Fabulous Ones and other regional favorites. What made them special was how easy they made difficult moves look. When Barry hit a dropkick, it looked picture-perfect because he had the athletic ability to execute it properly. When Mike applied a wrestling hold, it looked legitimate because he actually knew how to wrestle. Their matches had a different feel compared to other tag teams of the era. Most tag team wrestling at the time was about hot tags and big spots. The U.S. Express focused on actual wrestling fundamentals. They would work long sequences where they isolated opponents and used technical wrestling to wear them down. Barry's size advantage combined with Mike's technical skills created a combination that was hard for other teams to counter. Wrestling fans started to take notice. Here were two guys who could have been college football players or amateur wrestlers, and they were putting on excellent matches without needing gimmicks or storyline drama to carry them. Their success in Florida proved that there was still room in wrestling for legitimate athletes who could work. The WWF took notice too. Vince McMahon was building his national expansion and needed talent that could work in different markets. The U.S. Express fit perfectly into his vision of sports entertainment because they brought legitimate athletic credibility. In 1984, the WWF signed both Barry and Mike, and they kept the U.S. Express name and clean-cut image. What happened next showed just how talented these guys really were. Within months of joining the WWF, the U.S. Express defeated the Wild Samoans to win the WWF Tag Team Championship. This wasn't a fluke or a short transitional reign either. They held the titles for several months and defended them against top teams throughout the promotion. The big test came at the first WrestleMania in March 1985. The U.S. Express defended their tag team titles against Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik in front of a packed Madison Square Garden crowd. This was wrestling's biggest stage, and Barry and Mike had to prove they belonged with the top stars in the business. They ended up losing the titles that night, but their performance showed they could work at the highest level. What made the U.S. Express special wasn't just their wrestling ability. They connected with fans who were looking for heroes they could actually believe in. Barry and Mike looked like the kind of athletes you might have gone to school with. They weren't larger-than-life characters. They were believable good guys who happened to be really talented wrestlers. The success of the U.S. Express proved something important about wrestling fans. Yes, they enjoyed the entertainment and the characters, but they also respected genuine athletic ability. Barry and Mike showed that sometimes the best gimmick is no gimmick at all. Their tag team success gave Barry the foundation he needed to start thinking about singles competition. What happens when a tag team specialist decides he wants to prove he can carry matches all by himself? Barry Windham found himself asking this exact question after his success with the U.S. Express. Tag team wrestling is comfortable because you always have a partner to rely on when things get tough. But singles wrestling? That's where you find out what you're really made of. Moving from tag wrestling to singles competition kills more careers than just about anything else in the business. Some guys can work great as part of a team, but fall apart when they have to fill 20 minutes on their own. The timing is different. The psychology changes completely. You can't rely on hot tags or partner interference to get you out of tough spots. Barry knew all this, But he also knew he had something most tag team wrestlers didn't have: the size and technical ability to succeed as a singles wrestler. His early singles feuds in the WWF showed fans a different side of what Barry could do. When the US Express started winding down, Barry began working more singles matches against mid-card wrestlers like Magnificent Morocco. These weren't main event matches, but they were important testing grounds. Wrestling Morocco was perfect for Barry because Morocco was an experienced veteran who could work with bigger wrestlers and make them look good. The thing that surprised fans right away was how Barry moved in the ring as a singles wrestler. Most wrestlers his size worked a power-based style. They relied on their strength advantage and kept things simple. Barry was different. He could execute a picture-perfect dropkick that looked as good as any cruiserweights. He could work technical sequences that smaller wrestlers struggled with. When Barry locked in a submission hold, it looked legitimate because he actually understood leverage and body mechanics. His match psychology was even more impressive. Barry understood how to pace a singles match so the crowd stayed engaged for the entire 15 or 20 minutes. He knew when to work holds to build tension and when to pick up the pace with high-impact moves. Most big men either worked too slow and bored the crowd, or worked too fast and gassed themselves out early. Barry found the perfect balance. Opponents had to completely rethink their game plans when they faced Barry. If you came in expecting to outpower a big man, you were wrong because Barry was stronger than most wrestlers his size. If you planned to out-wrestle him technically, you were also wrong because Barry could chain wrestle with the best of them. If you thought you could outmove him, well, Barry was probably more athletic than you expected too. Wrestlers who worked with Barry during this period started talking about how different he was from other big men. He didn't rely on his size to get by. Instead, he used his height and reach as advantages while still wrestling a complete style. Barry could work the top rope, something most 6 feet 6 inches wrestlers avoided. He could work mat-based sequences that looked credible. He could brawl when the match called for it. The recognition Barry gained as a singles wrestler wasn't just from fans. Other wrestlers in the locker room started to take notice too. When wrestlers respect your work, that means something in the business. They were seeing Barry put on solid singles matches without the safety net of a tag team partner. He was proving he could carry his own weight as a performer. Wrestling magazines and observers started writing about Barry as someone to watch in the singles division. This was important because it showed that industry insiders recognized his potential. Barry wasn't just another big man who could do a few moves. He was becoming known as a complete wrestler who happened to be 6 feet 6 inches tall. What made Barry special as a singles wrestler was how he combined his natural gifts with smart wrestling. He didn't try to be something he wasn't. Barry used his size when it made sense, but he didn't rely on it exclusively. He could work technical matches against smaller opponents and power matches against bigger ones. This versatility made him valuable to promoters because Barry could work with anyone on the roster. By the mid-80s, Barry had established himself as more than just half of a successful tag team. He was becoming recognized as one of the most well-rounded big men in wrestling. This reputation would soon catch the attention of promotions looking for main event talent, setting up the next phase of his career. Sometimes you have to go back to where you came from to find out who you really are. By 1986, Barry Windham had tasted success in the WWF with the US Express and proven himself as a singles wrestler. He was working for the biggest wrestling company in the world with national television exposure. So why would he walk away from all that to return to the NWA and Jim Crockett promotions? On paper, it looked like career suicide. The WWF was expanding nationally while the NWA territories were struggling to compete with Vince McMahon's entertainment-focused approach. But here's the thing about Barry's decision. He understood something that a lot of wrestlers didn't get at the time. The WWF was moving towards shorter matches with more emphasis on characters and storylines. They wanted quick, punchy segments that would work on television. The NWA still focused on longer matches where wrestlers could really show what they could do in the ring. For someone with Barry's technical abilities, that difference was huge. The WWF style worked great for certain types of wrestlers. If you had a killer character or could cut amazing promos, you could get over quickly with shorter matches. But Barry's strengths were his in-ring work and his natural athletic ability. Those talents needed time to really shine. A 5-minute match on WWF television couldn't showcase what made Barry special. A 20-minute NWA main event could. When Barry made the move back to Jim Crockett Promotions, he immediately noticed the difference in how matches were structured. NWA crowds expected to see actual wrestling. They wanted technical sequences and logical match progression. This played right into Barry's wheelhouse because he could work both power moves and technical wrestling at a high level. The partnership opportunities in the NWA were also more suited to Barry's style. He teamed up with Ron Garvin, a tough veteran who knew how to work a crowd and could handle the talking while Barry focused on the wrestling. Their styles complemented each other perfectly. Garvin brought intensity and experience, while Barry brought size and athletic ability. Together, they captured the NWA World Tag Team Championship, proving that Barry could succeed in the NWA system. What really made the difference for Barry in the NWA was the longer match format. Instead of working 6 or 8 minute matches like he often did in the WWF, Barry was getting 15 to 20 minutes to tell a story in the ring. This extra time allowed him to showcase his full range of skills. He could start with technical wrestling, build to power moves, and finish with high-impact spots. The audience got to see everything Barry could do instead of just a highlight reel. The NWA crowds responded to Barry differently than WWF audiences had. NWA fans appreciated wrestlers who could actually wrestle. They respected technical ability and legitimate toughness. Barry's background as a football player and his natural athletic gifts meant more in the NWA, where fans understood the difference between sports entertainment and actual competition. Working with NWA veterans also helped Barry develop parts of his game that hadn't been fully explored in the WWF. He learned how to work different styles depending on his opponent. Against technical wrestlers, he could chain wrestle and work submission holds. Against brawlers, he could throw hands and work a more physical style. Against high flyers, he could use his size advantage while still keeping up with their pace. The television presentation in the NWA also favored Barry's strengths. NWA programming focused more on the wrestlers and their abilities rather than elaborate production values. When fans saw Barry on NWA television, they were watching him wrestle, not watching him perform in comedy skits or backstage segments. This allowed his natural charisma and wrestling ability to come through without distraction. By 1987, Barry had established himself as one of the top wrestlers in the NWA. He was working main events and getting serious consideration as a potential champion. The move back to the NWA hadn't hurt his career. It had actually elevated him to a level he probably couldn't have reached in the WWF at that time. The decision to return to the NWA proved that Barry understood his own strengths better than most wrestlers understand theirs. He knew where he could succeed and what kind of wrestling showcased his abilities best. This self-awareness would soon pay off in ways that would define his entire career. When two completely different wrestling styles collide, magic can happen, or everything can fall apart. Barry Windham and Ric Flair represented opposite approaches to professional wrestling, and when they stepped into the ring together, fans got to see what happened when raw athletic ability met seasoned ring psychology. Flair was the seasoned champion who knew every trick in the book. Barry was the athletic specimen who could do things in the ring that most wrestlers could only dream of. Their matches became must-see television because nobody knew which approach would win out. The setup for their encounters was perfect from a storytelling perspective. Ric Flair had been the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for what felt like forever. He was the guy who could talk his way out of trouble and cheat his way to victory when his wrestling skills weren't enough. Barry Windham was the clean-cut athlete who relied on his natural gifts and technical ability. Fans wanted to see if pure talent could overcome experience and dirty tactics. What made their matches so compelling was how their contrasting styles created natural drama in the ring. Flair would start matches trying to outmaneuver Barry with his experience and ring savvy. He'd work holds that were designed to wear down bigger opponents and look for opportunities to bend or break the rules. Barry would counter with his superior athleticism and technical skills, hitting moves that left fans wondering how someone his size could be so smooth in the ring. The technical exchanges between these two were wrestling clinics. Flair knew how to work with bigger opponents, but Barry wasn't just another big man. When Flair tried his usual tactics of chopping and working the leg, Barry could match him move for move. Barry's amateur wrestling background showed when he would counter Flair's signature moves with techniques that caught the Nature Boy off guard. Flair had to adjust his entire game plan when facing Barry because his normal advantages didn't apply. Their matches had moments where Barry looked absolutely dominant. There were sequences where his combination of size, strength, and technical skill made it seem like Flair had no answer. Barry would hit a perfect drop kick that sent Flair flying across the ring. He'd execute a suplex that looked effortless, despite Flair being no small man himself. These moments had fans believing that Barry was about to end Flair's championship reign. But here's where Flair's experience always seemed to pay off. Just when Barry appeared to have the match won, Flair would find a way to turn the tide. Maybe he'd get his feet on the ropes during a pin attempt. Maybe he'd grab a handful of tights when the referee wasn't looking. Sometimes he'd just flat-out low-blow Barry and hope the referee missed it. These tactics frustrated fans who wanted to see the better wrestler win, but they also made the matches incredibly dramatic. The near finishes in their championship matches were some of the best in wrestling history. Barry would have Flair beaten, and fans would be on their feet expecting a title change. Then something would go wrong at the last second. A referee would be distracted. Another wrestler would interfere. Flair would pull out some desperate counter that nobody saw coming. These close calls elevated Barry's status because fans could see he was capable of beating the champion. What these matches proved was that Barry belonged in main events with the biggest stars in wrestling. He wasn't just another challenger who got fed to Flair to make the champion look good. Barry pushed Flair to his absolute limit in every encounter. Their matches went long because both men could work extended periods without losing the crowd's attention. The storytelling was there. The technical wrestling was there. The drama was definitely there. Wrestling observers and fans started talking about Barry as championship material after these encounters with Flair. He had shown he could work at the main event level and hold his own against the best wrestler in the business. Even though Barry never managed to capture the NWA World Championship during this period, he had established himself as one of the top contenders in the promotion. The reputation Barry built through these matches with Flair opened doors that might have stayed closed otherwise. Promoters knew he could work with their top stars and deliver quality main events. Other wrestlers respected what he had accomplished against Flair. Most importantly, Barry had proven he was ready for whatever opportunity came next. The most shocking moments in wrestling happen when you least expect them. By 1987, Barry Windham had found the perfect partner in Lex Luger, and together they formed a tag team that fans called the Twin Towers. These two looked like they were built in a lab to be wrestlers. Luger had the bodybuilder physique and the clean-cut look that fans loved. Barry brought his technical skills and natural athleticism. When they stood together, they looked like they could beat any tag team in wrestling. What made their partnership work so well was how genuine their friendship appeared to be. You could see them talking and laughing together during interviews. They celebrated each other's successes and backed each other up when things got tough. Barry would pat Luger on the back after a big move. Luger would encourage Barry during difficult moments in matches. Fans bought into their friendship because it looked real. Their success as a tag team was undeniable. The Twin Towers captured tag team gold and looked like they could hold on to it for a long time. They had the size advantage over most teams they faced. Barry's wrestling ability combined with Luger's power made them a nightmare matchup for other tag teams. When they worked together, their timing was perfect. Barry would set up opponents for Luger's power moves, and Luger would create openings for Barry's technical wrestling. Wrestling fans started to see them as one of the most dominant tag teams in the NWA. They defended their championships against tough competition and always seemed to find a way to win. Their matches were entertaining because both men could work well individually, but they were even better as a team. Promoters were already talking about long title reigns and potential feuds that could carry the tag team division for months. The setup for the 1987 Great American Bash seemed routine. The Twin Towers were scheduled to defend their tag team titles in what everyone expected would be another successful defense. Barry and Luger had been working so well together that fans weren't worried about them losing. They had beaten tougher teams before, and their chemistry in the ring was at its peak. Leading up to the match, there were no signs that anything was wrong between Barry and Luger. They cut promos together like they always did. They talked about their opponents and how they planned to retain their championships. Barry seemed as committed to the team as ever. If there were any backstage issues, they weren't visible to fans or even to people who worked closely with them. The match itself started normally. Barry and Luger worked their usual game plan and looked like they were in control. They used their size advantage and superior conditioning to wear down their opponents. Everything was going according to plan until the moment that changed everything. Here's what happened at the exact moment that shocked everyone. Barry was supposed to help Luger during a crucial part of the match. Instead, he turned around and clotheslined his own partner. The crowd went completely silent for a few seconds because they couldn't process what they had just seen. Barry Windham, the clean-cut good guy, who had been Luger's trusted partner, had just attacked his best friend. The attack wasn't just a simple turn either. Barry beat on Luger with the intensity that made fans realize this wasn't a mistake or a moment of confusion. This was planned. Barry had been thinking about this betrayal and waiting for the right moment to execute it. He stomped on Luger and left him lying in the middle of the ring while the crowd booed louder than they had all night. Fans were in complete shock. Kids were crying because their hero had turned into a villain right in front of their eyes. Adults were standing up and yelling at Barry as he walked up the ramp. This wasn't just another heel turn. This was a betrayal that felt personal because fans had invested in the friendship between Barry and Luger. In one moment, Barry went from being one of the most popular wrestlers in the NWA to being one of the most hated. Fans who had cheered for him just minutes earlier now wanted to see him get beaten up. The betrayal was so effective because nobody saw it coming and because it destroyed something that fans genuinely cared about. This shocking turn opened the door to the biggest opportunity of Barry's career and would lead him to join wrestling's most exclusive group. What happens when wrestling's most exclusive club decides you're worthy of membership? After Barry's shocking betrayal of Lex Luger, the four Horsemen came calling. Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard had been wrestling's premier stable for years. They represented everything elite about professional wrestling: custom suits, expensive cars, and an attitude that said they were better than everyone else. When they decided Barry belonged with them, it meant they saw something special in his work. The question everyone had was whether Barry could adapt to the Horsemen's ruthless mentality. He had spent most of his career as a clean-cut good guy who won matches with superior wrestling ability. The Horsemen were different. They cheated when they needed to. They ganged up on opponents. They did whatever it took to win, and they didn't care if fans hated them for it. Could Barry make that mental shift from being a hero to being a villain? The answer came pretty quickly. Barry fit into the Horsemen like he had been born for the role. His technical wrestling skills were exactly what the group needed. Flair was the talker and the leader. Arn Anderson was the enforcer who could brawl with anyone. Tully Blanchard was the cocky technical wrestler. Barry brought something none of them had: legitimate size combined with world-class wrestling ability. At 6 feet 6 inches, he was the biggest member of the group, but he could still out-wrestle most of the smaller guys they faced. Barry's legitimate toughness made him perfect for the Horsemen's image. These guys weren't just playing tough, they actually were tough. Barry had played football at a high level and had grown up in the wrestling business. He knew how to handle himself in real confrontations, and that authenticity showed through on television. When the Horsemen acted like they owned the wrestling business, fans believed it because guys like Barry looked like they could back up their words. The classic matches during this period showed Barry at his absolute best. His battles with Dusty Rhodes were particularly memorable because they told perfect stories in the ring. Rhodes was the working man's hero who represented everything the Horsemen stood against. Barry was the athletic specimen who had joined wrestling's elite club. Their matches had real heat because fans genuinely wanted to see Rhodes beat up the guy who had betrayed their trust. Barry's work against Rhodes showcased every aspect of his wrestling ability. He could match Rhodes in brawling sequences when the matches got physical. He could out-wrestle Rhodes when they worked technical exchanges. Most importantly, Barry understood how to be the heel in these encounters. He would frustrate Rhodes in the crowd by using his advantages at exactly the right moments. The timing and psychology in these matches were perfect. The Horsemen's image suited Barry's new heel persona better than anyone expected. The group wore expensive suits and acted like they were above everyone else. Barry looked natural in this role because his size and athletic ability made him seem genuinely superior to other wrestlers. When he walked to the ring in a custom suit with the other Horsemen, he looked like he belonged with wrestling's elite. Barry played a major role in some of the NWA's most memorable storylines during this period. The Horsemen were involved in the biggest angles and the highest-rated television segments. Barry wasn't just along for the ride, he was contributing to storylines and helping create television that kept fans coming back week after week. His matches were drawing strong reactions from crowds, and his segments were some of the most talked-about parts of NWA programming. The group dynamic worked perfectly with Barry as a member. He could handle the wrestling while Flair did most of the talking. When they needed muscle, Barry and Arn Anderson could intimidate opponents physically. When they needed someone to have a great technical match, Barry could deliver that too. The Horsemen became even more dangerous with Barry in the group because he gave them options they hadn't had before. Barry didn't just join the Four Horsemen. He became one of their most valuable members. His combination of size, skill, and legitimate toughness made the group more complete than it had ever been. This should have been the peak period of Barry's career, but unfortunately, this golden run wouldn't last as long as it should have. Sometimes the biggest enemy a wrestler faces isn't in the ring, it's in their own head. Barry Windham had a reputation throughout his career that followed him everywhere he went. When he was motivated and engaged, he was absolutely incredible. He could put on 5-star matches with anyone and make it look effortless. But when he wasn't feeling it, when the storylines didn't interest him, or the creative direction seemed pointless, Barry could look like he was just going through the motions. How could someone with so much natural talent sometimes seem like they didn't care? This was the question that frustrated fans, promoters, and other wrestlers for years. Here was a guy who had everything you could want in a wrestler. He was 6 feet 6 inches with legitimate athletic ability. He could work technical matches or brawl with equal skill. He looked like a star and had the family connections to succeed. Yet there were times when Barry seemed completely disinterested in what was happening around him. The contrast between motivated Barry and unmotivated Barry was pretty stark. When he was engaged, you could see it immediately. His movements were crisp. His timing was perfect. He would hit drop kicks that looked like textbook examples of how the move should be done. He would work submission holds with the kind of technical precision that made other wrestlers jealous. These were the matches where Barry looked like he could beat anyone in the business. But then there were other times when Barry looked like he was sleepwalking through matches. His movements would be slower. He wouldn't put the same snap on his moves. The fire that made him special just wasn't there. Fans could tell the difference, and they reacted accordingly. When Barry was motivated, crowds were totally into his matches. When he wasn't, the energy in the building would drop noticeably. The backstage politics in wrestling certainly didn't help Barry's motivation issues. The wrestling business in the late 1980s and 1990s was changing rapidly. Storylines were becoming more entertainment-focused and less about actual wrestling. Creative decisions were often made by people who didn't understand what made Barry special as a performer. When he was given storylines that didn't make sense or opponents who couldn't work at his level, Barry's enthusiasm would drop off a cliff. Creative changes affected Barry more than they affected other wrestlers. Some guys could take any storyline and make it work through pure charisma or by working extra hard. Barry needed to believe in what he was doing to give his best effort. If a storyline seemed stupid, or if he was being asked to do things that went against his strengths as a performer, he would mentally check out. Other wrestlers who worked with Barry during his career had mixed things to say about his work ethic. When he was motivated, they said he was one of the best wrestlers they had ever been in the ring with. He would call spots perfectly and make everyone look good. But when he wasn't into it, some wrestlers felt like they were carrying him through matches. The inconsistency made Barry frustrating to work with because you never knew which version of him would show up. What it took to get Barry's best performances was pretty specific. He needed to respect his opponents and believe that the match meant something. He worked best when he was given freedom to call his own matches instead of being micromanaged. Barry also responded well to being treated like a main event star. When promoters showed they valued his work, he would give them everything he had. This inconsistency definitely impacted Barry's later career opportunities. Promoters wanted wrestlers they could count on to deliver the same level of performance every night. Barry's reputation for sometimes not caring made some bookers hesitant to push him as a top guy. They worried that he might have an off night during a big show or important match. Here's the thing about Barry's motivation problems, though. They weren't really about laziness. Barry cared deeply about wrestling and wanted to do things the right way. When he seemed disinterested, it was usually because he felt like the business was moving away from what he loved about it. Barry was a perfectionist who got frustrated when he was put in situations where he couldn't perform at his best. This perfectionist streak would clash more and more with how the wrestling business was changing in the 1990s and beyond. In wrestling, timing is everything, and sometimes the timing just never works out. By February 1993, Barry Windham had been chasing the NWA World Heavyweight Championship for years. He had come close multiple times but could never quite capture that elusive top prize. Then WCW decided to make a change at Super Brawl 3, and Barry finally got his shot against Keiji Muto for the title. After all those years of near misses and what-if moments, this looked like Barry's time. The setup for Barry's championship opportunity came at an interesting time in wrestling history. WCW was trying to establish credibility for their version of the NWA World Championship while also building new stars. Barry represented something that made sense for both goals. He had the wrestling ability to have great matches with anyone they put in front of him. He also had the name recognition and family history that wrestling fans respected. When Barry stepped into the ring with Keiji Muto at Super Brawl 3, fans who had followed his career for years thought they were about to witness something special. This was the moment Barry had been building toward since his early days with the US Express. All the great matches with Ric Flair, all the Four Horsemen success, all the technical wrestling clinics he had put on. Everything seemed to be leading to this championship victory. The match itself played out like a classic Barry Windham performance. He used his size advantage against Muto, while also matching him in technical wrestling exchanges. Barry looked like he belonged in a world championship match, and when he got the victory, it felt like destiny finally arriving. After years of being the guy who could beat anyone but never won the big one, Barry Windham was finally a world champion. But here's where things started to go wrong almost immediately. Wrestling championships are only as valuable as the booking and promotion behind them. Barry's title reign began during a period when WCW was going through major changes behind the scenes. The company was dealing with financial problems and creative confusion. New management was coming in with different ideas about who should be pushed as main event stars. The injury problems that hit Barry during his championship reign made everything worse. Wrestling with injuries is part of the business, but Barry was dealing with issues that affected his ability to work at the level fans expected from a world champion. When you're already fighting an uphill battle to get people interested in your title reign, physical limitations become a huge problem. Backstage politics also worked against Barry during this period. WCW was making decisions based on factors that had nothing to do with wrestling ability. They wanted to push certain wrestlers for business reasons or personal relationships. Barry's championship reign got caught up in these politics, and he found himself losing support from the people making creative decisions. The writing was on the wall when WCW decided to put the championship back on Ric Flair. Barry's title loss to Flair represented more than just a routine title change. It showed the pattern of missed opportunities that had defined Barry's career. Just when it looked like he was going to get his chance to run with the ball as champion, circumstances would change and the opportunity would slip away. This title reign was supposed to be Barry's validation after years of being considered one of the best wrestlers never to win a major world championship. Instead, it became another example of how timing and politics could derail even the most talented wrestlers. Barry held the NWA World Championship for less than 2 months, which wasn't nearly enough time to establish himself as a credible champion or to have the kind of memorable matches that define great title reigns. Looking back, this brief championship run represented Barry's last real shot at sustained main event success. The wrestling business was changing in ways that wouldn't favor his style of wrestling. Companies were moving toward entertainment-focused programming that emphasized characters and storylines over pure wrestling ability. Barry's strengths as a technical wrestler and legitimate athlete were becoming less important than the ability to cut promos and connect with casual fans. The championship that Barry had chased for so long finally came, but it arrived too late and lasted too briefly to mean what it should have meant. Barry Windham's story reminds us that having all the talent in the world doesn't guarantee you'll get everything you deserve. He had the size, the technical skills, and the family connections that should have made him a multiple-time world champion. Instead, he became wrestling's greatest what-if story. His Hall of Fame inductions with both the US Express and Four Horsemen prove his impact was real and lasting. Wrestling fans and historians still talk about his matches with Ric Flair and his technical ability. Maybe the real legacy isn't the world championship he never held long enough, but the template he created for future big men who could actually wrestle. Like and subscribe for 100 Years of Luck. Until next time.